We are now going to decode The Voice of the Silence by Helena Blavatsky, the forgotten book that reveals your unbreakable divine connection to the universe. Within these pages lies the hidden knowledge that awakens the dormant abilities in your consciousness and unveils your true spiritual destiny. It is an invitation to go beyond superficiality and enter into direct contact with spiritual realms that, for a long time, were reserved for only a few initiates. As you explore these pages, you will partake in a genuine call to essence, a reminder that there is far more to your existence than what the senses can perceive. In 1889, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, one of the most controversial mystics of all time, published one of her last books, just a few years before her death, The Voice of the Silence. This mysterious book contains the keys to spiritual dimensions of consciousness that unlock the very operating system of human perception. Its pages contain fragments of an ancient esoteric manuscript, preserved by the Indo-Tibetan mystery schools through uninterrupted lineages of masters. These adepts developed a perception that goes beyond normal senses, accessing realms of understanding that modern quantum science is only beginning to glimpse. These portals of wisdom connect us to a primordial knowledge that existed before any structured religious organization. The manuscript begins with an unexpected revelation about the voice of the nothingness, the sound without sound that can only be heard when the mind attains perfect stillness. This subtle vibration exists at the foundation of all existence, but remains inaccessible to those immersed in mental noise. Blavatsky explains that this inner sound is actually your own divine essence calling you home, a frequency of consciousness that awakens dormant spiritual faculties when properly tuned. In our world saturated with noise and constant distractions, this teaching offers an antidote to spiritual disconnection, revealing that true knowledge is not confined to what the rational mind can process. What makes it extraordinary is its lineage. Presenting herself merely as a translator, Blavatsky gained unprecedented access to one of humanity's most carefully guarded treasures, the Book of the Golden Precepts. During her remarkable stay in Tibet, she underwent rigorous initiation with masters who preserved the original wisdom from which all the great religions later diverged and fractured. These enlightened masters, whom she called Mahatmas, safeguarded what they termed the primordial wisdom religion, the singular truth that predates all organized spiritual systems throughout history. In that sense, Blavatsky's work can be viewed as a bridge between ancient traditions and the modern world, bringing to light teachings that were once restricted to secret groups. The transmission of these teachings was fraught with difficulties and persecution, as many authorities feared the liberating power such knowledge could wield over the populace. These mystery traditions operated in secret not out of elitism, but out of necessity. Their teachings contain practical methodologies for activating latent human potential so powerful that in the wrong hands, they could be dangerously misused. More importantly, this knowledge fundamentally shakes all systems of control by revealing an essential truth. Divine consciousness exists in every person as an inborn right. When fully understood, this realization renders any external spiritual authority obsolete and nullifies control mechanisms based on fear. This conviction, that each human being carries a divine spark within, independent of intermediaries, is revolutionary. It was this core teaching that often thrust Blavatsky into the spotlight of skepticism and criticism in her era. Few realize that these mystery schools also preserved advanced scientific knowledge that modern physics is only now rediscovering. The Tibetan understanding of consciousness described quantum principles millennia before Western science conceived them. These traditions hold that matter itself is crystallized consciousness, that the observer fundamentally affects the observed, principles later confirmed by quantum physics. This explains why mystical and scientific understanding are finally converging in our era, as science catches up with what adepts knew long ago. The dialogue between spirituality and science, long separated, proves essential for building a new paradigm in which internal experience and empirical validation walk side by side. Blavatsky's translation offers something unprecedented, a detailed mapping of consciousness itself. Like an explorer charting unknown territories, she provides precise reference points for inner development, clearly marking the thresholds of transformation, warning about common pitfalls and distinguishing authentic achievements from mere psychic phenomena. While most spiritual texts speak in vague abstractions, the voice of the silence offers practical guidance for navigating realms of consciousness that transcend physical limitations, enabling you to recognize and access the immortal aspects of your nature. It is as though, rather than a generic map, we are given a detailed compass indicating each turning point on the path to self-realization. The mind is the great slayer of the real. This single sentence holds the master key to spiritual liberation. Most seekers remain trapped in mental constructs, confusing conceptual understanding with genuine realization. The mind creates an elaborate simulation of reality, filtering all experience through conditioned beliefs and identifications. Even spiritual experiences are co-opted by the mind, turned into concepts instead of serving as portals to transcendence. Thus, the initial challenge for any practitioner is to go beyond the snares of thought, to experience what Blavatsky calls the real, the truth underlying all illusion. Digital technologies amplify mental proliferation by creating the illusion of expanded awareness. Algorithms reinforce existing patterns, generating sophisticated echo chambers that disguise themselves as reality. Social media platforms invade the brain's reward systems, engendering addiction to mental stimulation that prevents authentic inner silence. Blavatsky teaches us to let the disciple slay the slayer. This means recognizing the mind as a tool rather than accepting it as the fundamental identity. The practice begins with observing mental activity without identification, gradually expanding awareness of the silence in which thoughts arise. This ability to witness the mind is the first step toward awakening a new perception in which one is free to contemplate life from a calmer, broader perspective. Most modern meditation practices have been reduced to stress management. The original purpose was far more radical: to create conditions to recognize your true nature beyond the mind. When mental activity diminishes, a different mode of knowing emerges: direct perception, unmediated by conceptual filters. Blavatsky describes this as entering the soundless sound, or the voice of silence. When thoughts cease their chatter, intuitive understanding arises without mental processing. This silent knowing reveals the illusion of separation that underlies human suffering. The discrete self you take for granted proves to be a mental construct with no inherent existence. As long as we fail to recognize this illusion, we remain prisoners of a sense of I that is, in reality, temporary and ever-changing. The voice of the silence unveils 7 transcendent virtues, the paramitas, which function as gateways to enlightened consciousness. They are not ethical guidelines but transformative powers that reconfigure your entire being. Dana, transcendental generosity, represents a fundamental shift from acquisition to circulation. In a culture obsessed with accumulation, Dana recognizes that fullness arises from giving, not receiving. This practice dissolves attachment and opens space for the energy of abundance to flow naturally. Shila transcends conventional morality. Beyond following external rules, it represents perfect harmony of thought, word, and action, the elimination of internal contradictions that dissipate spiritual energy. When your entire being moves in unified purpose, an extraordinary power becomes available. Shanti goes beyond ordinary patience. This luminous form of tolerance remains unshakable in the face of provocation, maintaining clear perception regardless of circumstances. In our reactive culture, where outrage has become normalized, Shanti offers imperturbable stability, the capacity to respond instead of react. Vairagya represents the liberation from emotional reactivity, neither suppressing emotions nor being controlled by them. It is not a cold detachment, but an enlightened equanimity that perceives the transitory nature of all phenomena. allowing both pleasure and pain to flow through consciousness without causing disturbance. Vriya manifests a spiritual energy that overcomes all obstacles. Unlike willpower that generates internal struggle, Virya flows from alignment with a deeper purpose. When your actions express your authentic nature rather than the ego's agenda, energy naturally arises. Dhyana transcends conventional meditation techniques, representing an established contemplative capacity, the ability to maintain deep awareness under all conditions. This permanent shift in perception marks a significant stage of development. Prajna culminates the sequence with transcendental wisdom that perceives reality directly, without conceptual mediation. This radiant intelligence operates beyond rational thought, simultaneously understanding the interdependent nature of all phenomena. These 7 gateways develop simultaneously, not in a rigid or completely linear manner. They represent practical capabilities and measurable transformations in how you perceive and interact with reality. Blavatsky presents 2 distinct paths that conventional spiritual teachings usually obscure. One leads to individual liberation, the other to compassionate service. This distinction cuts through the comfort zone of spiritual materialism, dominating current practice, as it exposes the seeker's deeper motivations. The first path culminates in personal enlightenment, freedom through the transcendence of egoic identification. This realization, known as pratyeka Buddha in Buddhism, is the genuine pursuit of most serious practitioners. The second path, the path of the Bodhisattva, involves renouncing complete liberation to serve humanity. Sweeter is the fruit of rest and liberation for oneself, the teaching acknowledges, but sweeter still is the fruit of the long and bitter duty, renunciation for the sake of others. In this enlightened selflessness lies a paradox. By relinquishing personal gain, the Bodhisattva attains an even broader state of freedom, for it recognizes itself in the totality of all beings. This challenges how modern spirituality commercializes ancient practices as tools for personal enhancement. Consumer-driven approaches promise better health, greater prosperity, and improved relationships, all centered on individual benefit. The Bodhisattva path inverts this orientation. The highest spiritual attainment arises through apparent self-sacrifice, by renouncing personal liberation for the good of all beings. The practitioner gains an understanding deeper than that achieved by the direct pursuit of enlightenment, transforming the apparent limitation into transcendental freedom. The Bodhisattva serves out of the consciousness of fundamental unity, the perception that no being exists in isolation. This understanding transforms compassion from a sentimental emotion into a direct comprehension of interrelated reality. Others' suffering becomes as immediate as one's own pain, making service a natural expression of clear vision. Thus, serving ceases to be a moral duty and becomes the very expression of the wisdom of one who has already transcended the illusion of a separate self. Blavatsky reveals the existence of the silver thread, an unbreakable connection between individual consciousness and universal consciousness. This subtle energy channel links your personal self to your immortal nature. Fix the gaze of your soul upon the star whose ray you are. This instruction points to the recognition that you are a direct emanation of the divine. The silver thread has always existed, although most human beings have forgotten its presence. Through this thread, each individual finds the way back to the center of themselves, remembering their true origin. The silver thread manifests as an intuitive knowing that transcends rational thought, a sudden clarity that does not arise from logical reasoning, but from your higher consciousness communicating with your everyday perception. Most significantly, the silver thread cannot be broken. No matter how lost in illusion you may be, the connection to your true nature remains intact. You may temporarily forget it or fail to recognize it, but you cannot destroy it. This teaching provides the metaphysical basis for hope. Even in the darkest moments, the silver thread is ready to guide you back to wholeness. It facilitates inspiration, spiritual guidance, and moments of transcendence, reminding us that at the core of our existence, we are light, even when enveloped in mist. Practices to strengthen awareness of this connection include silent meditation, attention to intuition, and regular contemplation of your essence, free from social conditioning and personal history. As consciousness develops, synchronicities and guidance naturally increase. As evolution progresses, the silver thread becomes increasingly visible, eventually transforming from a thread into a radiant channel of light. At the pinnacle of spiritual development, the distinction between individual and universal consciousness dissolves. The ray recognizes itself as the star. The drop merges with the ocean. This realization does not exclude individuality, but transcends it, placing it in a far broader context. Every authentic spiritual path eventually leads to a confrontation with what Blavatsky calls the destroyer, accumulated shadow aspects that resist transformation. This encounter represents the most challenging phase of the spiritual journey, where many seekers give up. The destroyer encompasses everything we deny, repress, or refuse to face, manifesting as fear, doubt, and resistance as we approach true change. In psychological terms, it represents unconscious defenses against transformation, even if positive. Touching this layer of ourselves requires courage, for confronting the parts we deem unacceptable can be profoundly uncomfortable. The voice of the silence teaches that this confrontation is necessary. The destroyer is not an enemy to be defeated, but an aspect of oneself to be integrated. The disciple must regain the child state he has lost. Only then can the first sound echo in his ear. This child state refers to the integration of all psychic aspects into wholeness, nothing rejected, nothing denied. Only then does the individual gain unrestricted access to their vitality and authenticity. This teaching inverts conventional spiritual wisdom. Many traditions advocate suppressing negative qualities or battling against inner darkness. Esoteric teaching shows that such approaches further strengthen the destroyer. That which we resist persists. That which we accept transforms. Harden thy soul against the snares of the self. Then shall it deserve the name of diamond soul. This diamond soul represents a consciousness that becomes unbreakable through integration, not fragmentation. Like a diamond whose facets align in perfect structure, integrated consciousness cannot be divided against itself. It is in accepting the entirety of our being that true strength resides. The approach involves bravely confronting one's own shadow, rejected parts, wounds, forbidden desires, and unacknowledged fears. Rather than waging war against these elements, we observe them with compassion, recognizing them as distorted facets lacking awareness. This confrontation unfolds in layers throughout the spiritual journey. Each time an aspect of the destroyer is integrated, consciousness expands, energy increases, and perception clears. What once seemed threatening becomes potential strength when correctly understood. The final teaching is that the destroyer contains the energy needed for transformation. Fears, when faced, become courage. Wounds, when acknowledged, become wisdom. Denied power, when reclaimed, becomes spiritual capacity. Nothing is lost. Everything can be transmuted into light. This understanding transforms spiritual practice. Instead of striving for something external, practice becomes the rediscovery of what already exists, removing veils that obscure our fundamental nature. The promise goes beyond personal transformation to encompass collective awakening. As individual consciousness expands, it affects the field of human potential, making awakening more accessible to everyone. Each person who recognizes their true nature creates a model that strengthens collective capacity, serving as a beacon of light in the midst of darkness. This understanding brings immense responsibility. As humanity confronts convergent crises, spiritual development becomes a necessity, not a luxury. Activating higher human capacities may determine whether we plunge into conflict or evolve toward a more conscious organization. Ancient wisdom proves remarkably practical for our present moment. As technological acceleration and geopolitical conflicts intensify, these teachings offer stability amid turbulence. They are evolutionary tools preparing us to navigate complexity. History shows that in periods of great upheaval, the possibility for evolutionary leaps in collective consciousness emerges, and this moment is no exception. Despite appearances of degeneration, we stand on the brink of an unprecedented spiritual opportunity. The intensity of global challenges creates the conditions for accelerated evolution, pressure that turns carbon into diamond. The choice is yours. Will you seek spiritual practice for personal comfort, or will you recognize your role in humanity's journey? Will you settle for the temporary freedoms of consumer spirituality, or will you embrace the challenging path of authentic transformation? At this point, the Voice of the Silence presents itself not merely as a book, but as a true manual of instructions for humanity's evolutionary transition. The boundaries between ancestral wisdom and modern consciousness become increasingly blurred. What once seemed esoteric is increasingly revealed as practical psychology for navigating turbulent times. The ancestral path unfolds, offering liberation not as a distant promise, but as an immediate possibility. In this sense, Blavatsky's text functions as a temporal and cultural bridge, uniting ancient practices with a contemporary mindset that demands urgent solutions. If Blavatsky's ideas spark your interest, immerse yourself in the source. The transformative power of her deepest spiritual text can be directly experienced. The book distills the essence of ancient wisdom into a small yet powerful volume that has changed the lives of seekers for generations. This book is one of Blavatsky's last gifts to humanity, revealing the path to spiritual liberation through poetically beautiful language that speaks directly to the soul. The attentive reader will feel resonances activating subtle areas of perception, often dormant due to routine and social conditioning. Your birthright awaits recognition, a consciousness beyond limitations, a compassion that transcends mere feeling, and a wisdom beyond conceptual knowledge. The journey does not lead you away from the world, but rather toward transforming it through your awakened presence. The Voice of the Silence speaks to you now, at this exact moment. All you need to do is listen, for the call echoes not only in the remote mountains of Tibet, but within the living sanctuary of your own heart. When the world's clamor subsides, the inner voice is revealed, inviting you to join the grand cosmic dance of human evolution, an invitation that, once accepted, can never be forgotten. It is also important to emphasize that by carefully studying each passage of the book, we notice the subtlety and precision with which Blavatsky describes states of consciousness that can only be fully understood through direct experience. Reading alone cannot substitute for the transformative experience that emerges from the constant practice of the precepts presented. Each chapter seems to function as an additional layer of depth, inviting the reader to plunge into increasingly profound levels of self-inquiry and expanded perception. Understanding the paramitas, for instance, is not just grasping their conceptual meanings. It is letting them shape our way of acting and reacting in the face of daily challenges. Similarly, the notion of the silver thread is only fully revealed when we cultivate inner silence and learn to distinguish the voice of intuition from the mental frenzy that so often dominates our thoughts. These crucial points in Blavatsky's teaching become even clearer when we remember that the ultimate purpose of this path is not merely to acquire intellectual knowledge, but to experience a profound transformation of being, something that resonates across all dimensions of human life, personal, social, and planetary. At the same time, Blavatsky's trajectory as both a mystic and a scholar serves as an inspiration for those seeking to unite courage, discernment, and commitment on their spiritual journey. She faced strong resistance and even persecution from conservative sectors that saw her message as a challenge to the established order. Nevertheless, her determination to spread this ancestral wisdom remained unwavering. In this sense, the book is not only an invitation to self-knowledge, but also a call to the responsibility of sharing these lights with the world, once we are ready to do so with integrity and compassion. Thus, the work goes beyond the individual realm, spurring the construction of an increasingly conscious network of people committed to collective upliftment. Blavatsky also emphasizes that the disciple's path is not linear. There are advances and setbacks, sudden leaps of understanding and periods of apparent stagnation. At each stage, however, the importance of internal discipline, radical honesty with oneself, and the cultivation of genuine compassion is underscored. Without these elements, spiritual practice can easily degenerate into mere displays of psychic power or religious manipulation. On the other hand, when the student assumes the humble posture of a learner, recognizing both their limitations and their unlimited potential, a kind of synchronization with higher planes of consciousness occurs, and progress becomes inevitable. In short, the book remains a valuable map for those who wish to navigate the complex archipelagos of inner life. With each rereading, new dimensions unfold as though the text were alive and in constant dialogue with the reader's soul. This living, almost organic characteristic stems from the primordial source that nourished Blavatsky, the ancient Tibetan teachings combined with her own Western sensibility. The result is a cultural and spiritual bridge that harmoniously merges aspects often perceived as antagonistic. Thus, today's reader may feel supported both by logical clarity and by the mystical depth the text offers. And by following in the footsteps of this ancestral trail, one discovers they are not alone. Thousands of seekers around the world are awakening to the same reality, forming a true spiritual support network that transcends geographic borders and cultural differences. It is therefore not merely intellectual knowledge. The great key lies in integrating these principles into daily existence, allowing the virtues of the paramitas to guide choices, attitudes, and thoughts. This is the challenge and also the opportunity contained in the voice of the silence. A journey that does not end on the last page, but continues in every act of courage, every gesture of compassion, and every insight that emerges from the inner silence. That is why many consider this book a sort of permanent companion throughout life, a constant reminder that we are much more than the limiting narratives people tell us, or that we tell ourselves. Such a reminder has the power to lighten existential burdens and illuminate paths once invisible, uniting more and more the individual being with the universal being. In this panorama, it becomes evident that Blavatsky's legacy is as urgent today as it was in her own time. We live in a globally interconnected society, yet one that is emotionally fragmented, where technologies, though useful, can drive us even further from our essence if there is no conscious work of self-observation and introspection. This book arrives as a balm, reminding us that true revolution begins within each one of us, and that genuine peace, the fruit of a quieted mind, radiates naturally into the world around us. If enough people attune to this call, we may witness a seismic shift in our patterns of coexistence, establishing a culture guided by cooperation, empathy, and transcendence of the artificial divisions that so deeply separate us. Thus, delving into the pages of The Voice of the Silence is ultimately an act of courage. It is accepting the challenge of looking within, facing shadows, and recognizing the inner destroyer, but also discovering the inextinguishable light that dwells at your core. It is realizing that however chaotic the world may seem, there is a center of serenity and strength capable of sustaining us through any storm. And above all, it is understanding that we are not isolated in this process, but rather linked to each other by this same silver thread Blavatsky describes, the universal network of consciousness that reminds us of our true divine nature. Studying, reflecting upon, and experiencing these teachings may be the most significant contribution we can make to humanity, for each individual awakening ignites a flame that illuminates the path for many.